this next question is, if you could change one thing in your life, Tori, or in general, what would that be? And you can interpret this, like I say, 30,000 feet up, political, microcosm, anything.
30,000 feet up?
Oh, yeah.
I'd change the world.
Well, you would. Well, you've already climbed summits, probably close to that.
I'd change the world, and
anyway.
Microcosm, I'd change my mind.
Okay.
I would pay teachers a really phenomenal salary so that we would lure the best and the brightest into teaching. And then I would make education free. Now, that's,
right.
that's not a balancing equation, but
of course.
You can't pay teachers a lot of money if education is free.
Going for free. Right.
But, yeah.
I like that one. Now, this next question is a mouthful. Can you describe in detail a particular situation or scenario where you utilize your own philosophy or style on leadership? It can be more than one.
Well, I think that comes down to the issue of integrity.
Okay.
During my first row, in the midst of Hurricane Danielle, the storm hit me the morning of September the 5th. The boat capsized 5 or 6 times, and I thought, you know what, I'm out of here. I can't take this anymore. It's too violent. It's too brutal. Every capsize felt like a car crash. And so I went out, and I was going to set off my emergency position indicating radio beacon, which was on the bow bulkhead as far away from the cabin as I could put it, because I wanted to have to think about it. I couldn't just set it off in a raving panic.
Oh, I see.
So
like
I'd
the
have
morning
to,
alarm clock.
Yeah, I'd have to get out of the cabin. I'd have to crawl across the deck to get to the distress beacon. And in the time it took me to do that, waves were coming over the top of the boat. The boat was going under the surface of the water. I got the distress beacon, and I recognized I couldn't ask anybody else to come out and get me. I decided to go out into the ocean in a rowboat. I wasn't in a fishing vessel. I wasn't on a cruise ship. I had no right to ask somebody else to come out and get me. And so I tied the distress beacon to my life vest, climbed back into the cabin, went through 6 more capsizes that day with the distress beacon tied to my life vest, not sighting it off. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that's about, assuming responsibility for my actions. And, lots of us do things we kind of wish we hadn't. But we need to assume responsibility for that. We've got, all kinds of things that we could achieve and all kinds of things we could do if we're just willing to step up and say, yep, I did that. Maybe that was a bad choice, or maybe that was a good choice. But
and that, I've studied and read your bio, and done some research on you, obviously. I was curious to get your insight into that moment. I don't know if it was defining or not, when you finally hit the beacon,
right.
On that first tour of duty, if you will. How did that feel?
It felt
in that one moment.
Horrible. Because it was failure writ large when I set off that distress beacon. And the hurricane hit on September the 5th. I didn't set off the beacon until September the 7th.
That's courage.
Another hurricane, Earl, had passed well north of my position. I didn't know it. I didn't know I'd been through a hurricane. I just knew it had been really bad. And I looked out, and it seemed safe enough to ask for help at that point. But as soon as I switched on that beacon, I wanted to switch it off. And I knew that emergency systems would already be mobilizing. And even if I turned it off, people would still be obligated to come and look for me. And so it's really bad form to turn it off and go, oh, changed my mind, turn it off again, turn it on.
Yeah, that wouldn't go over too well.
Yeah, and so I had to wait. And the plane flew over. And at that point I said, I'm feeling better. I might like to continue. And they said, well, there's a container ship in the area. It'll come by and have a look at you. And if the captain feels it's okay, they'll let you go. And then a few minutes later, they came back on the radio and they said, we've talked to the U.S. Coast Guard. This is a British plane. We've talked to the U.S. Coast Guard. They want you to know there's a force 10 gale on the way to your position. They recommend that you, quote, take the ride, end quote.
The polite way of saying abort.
Yeah. And so the night the Independent Spirit, the container ship, picked me up, it was hit by the Force 10 gale, and it broke 1/4-inch steel deck plates on the Independent Spirit. So I left at the right time.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah, probably not.
Wow.